Have you ever felt tired in a way that sleep cannot fix? Tired not in your body, but somewhere deeper, as if your soul has been holding its breath for years. Sometimes I sit quietly before the camera and imagine you on the other side of the screen, maybe in your living room, maybe with a cup of tea, maybe after a long day of taking care of everyone else, and I want to ask you something very gently. Are you exhausted? From always being strong? From always saying, "I'm fine"? From always trying to prove that you are enough? Because if you are, you're not alone. Most people don't talk about this kind of tiredness. It's not the kind doctors measure. It doesn't show up on blood tests, but it's there like a quiet weight on the chest. It's the tiredness of performing. Somewhere along the way, without even noticing, we stopped living and started acting. As children, we learned very quickly which version of us received love. The quiet one, the successful one, the responsible one, the cheerful one. So we adjusted. We shaped ourselves like soft clay, molding into whatever earned a smile, approval, safety, and little by little, something very natural inside us went silent. We didn't mean to betray ourselves. We were just trying to survive. But survival slowly turned into a lifetime role. We became the good daughter, the reliable husband, the strong mother, the successful professional, the spiritual person who always has it together. And after so many years, the mask fit so tightly that we forgot we were wearing one. Life began to feel like a stage. Every conversation, a performance. Every family gathering, a script. Every social smile, carefully rehearsed. Even when we were alone, we were still acting, trying to be the person we thought we should be. It's strange, isn't it? We were born as something effortless like the sky, like the ocean, and yet we spend decades trying to become someone else. Imagine an actor who forgets the movie has ended and keeps playing the character long after the lights are off. That's how many of us live. And here's the quiet tragedy. Performing is heavy, not physically heavy, but energetically heavy. Because every time you pretend, your body tightens. Every time you suppress your truth, your breath becomes shallow. Every time you try to control how others see you, your nervous system goes into defense. Science actually shows this. When we live in constant stress and self-protection, our brain stays in survival mode. The heart loses coherence. The body produces more stress hormones. Our natural electromagnetic field, the energy the heart generates, becomes chaotic. In simple words, we lose harmony. It's like trying to swim upstream all day long. Of course you're tired. You're not weak. You're swimming against your own nature. And yet, most of us think the answer is to try harder, be better, fix yourself, improve yourself, work on yourself. But what if nothing is wrong with you? What if the exhaustion isn't because you're not enough? What if it's because you're trying to be someone you're not? There's a moment very quiet, very subtle that changes everything. It's not dramatic. No lightning, no angels, no fireworks. Just a small moment when you stop. You stop proving. You stop pretending. You stop managing everyone's perception of you. You sit down and you exhale. And for the first time in years, you don't try to become anything. You simply are. That moment is the doorway. That's where awakening begins. Not when you learn more books, not when you collect more techniques, not when you become more spiritual. And it begins the instant you put the mask down. Because awakening is not adding something new. It's removing what was never you. Think about a mirror covered in dust. You don't need to create a reflection. The reflection is already there. You just wipe the dust away. All this performing, all this striving, all this becoming, that's just dust. Underneath it, you were always whole. From a deeper perspective, even a quantum perspective, who you truly are is not the character. You are the awareness behind the character, the field in which thoughts appear, the silent presence watching this moment right now. Awareness doesn't perform. The sky doesn't perform being blue. The ocean doesn't perform being deep. A flower doesn't try to impress anyone before it blooms. It simply opens, effortlessly, naturally, because blooming is its nature. And maybe, just maybe, peace is your nature too. Maybe love is your nature. Maybe authenticity is your nature, but you can't feel that while you're acting, because acting is contraction. Awakening is relaxation. Acting says, I must control. Awakening whispers, let go. Acting says, I must become. Awakening smiles. You already are. So here's the gentle invitation I want to leave with you today. Not a technique, not a method, just a small experiment. Tonight, when everything is quiet, sit somewhere comfortable. Turn off the noise, put your phone down, and for a few minutes, don't improve yourself. Don't fix yourself. Don't pray for anything. Just breathe. Feel your chest rise and fall. Feel the weight of your body in the chair. Let your shoulders drop and allow yourself to be no one. Not a parent, not a partner, not a success, not a failure. Just presence, like a river that stops fighting the current. Like a leaf resting on the surface of the water, you might notice something surprising. A softness, a space, a gentle aliveness that has always been there, waiting patiently behind all the effort. That's your true self. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't need perfection. It doesn't need to perform. It just needs permission to breathe. And the beautiful thing is, the moment you stop performing, your soul finally does. 1. We were taught to perform before we even knew who we were. If you sit very quietly and look back over the long river of your life, you may begin to notice something tender and almost heartbreaking, which is that the habit of performing did not begin in adulthood, did not begin at work, did not even begin in relationships, but started when you were so young that you still believed the world was made of magic and your whole universe could fit inside the arms of your parents. As children, we arrived here open and unguarded, like clear water with no shape of its own, simply reflecting whatever light touched us. And in those early days, we did not know anything about success or failure or reputation. We only knew how to laugh when something felt joyful and cry when something hurt. We only knew how to be real without editing ourselves. And that innocence was our natural state. But very slowly, almost invisibly, we began to learn a different language. Not the language of the heart, but the language of approval. Because we noticed that when we behaved a certain way, the adults smiled, and when we behaved another way, their faces tightened. And without anyone explaining it directly, we understood that love seemed to come with conditions. So we adjusted. We learned to say yes, even when our body wanted to say no. We learned to sit still, even when our spirit wanted to run. We learned to hide our tears because someone told us to be strong. And we learned to swallow our questions because someone told us not to talk back. And each small adjustment looked harmless at the time, like bending a young branch that still feels soft and flexible. At school, the training became more refined, because suddenly we were measured, compared, graded, and ranked. And words like good, smart, successful, and talented became little trophies that determined how much attention we received. So we began to chase those labels as if they were oxygen, believing that being loved meant being impressive. Without realizing it, we stepped onto a stage. The good child became a role. The polite child became a role. The strong child became a role. And the more praise we received, the more tightly we held onto those roles. Because for a young heart, nothing feels more frightening than the possibility of losing love. So we performed, not because we were fake or manipulative, but because we were innocent and afraid. And an innocent mind will always choose belonging over authenticity, even if that choice slowly costs the soul its freedom. Over time, the ego began to form like a costume stitched together from other people's expectations. A patchwork identity made of comments, compliments, criticisms, and comparisons, and we started calling that costume me, even though it was only a collection of borrowed ideas. You are such a good girl. You are the smart one. You must be strong for everyone. You have to succeed. Each sentence became another layer of fabric wrapped around our true self. And after years of wearing those layers, we forgot what our original skin felt like. From a psychological view, this is conditioning. From a spiritual view, this is identification. And from an energetic view, this is contraction. Because every time we shape ourselves to fit someone else's expectation, we tighten a little inside, like clenching a fist and never fully opening it again. And the body remembers that tension, even when the mind pretends everything is fine. So what began as a small strategy to receive love slowly turned into a lifelong performance. And the saddest part is that we became so good at it that even we believed the act. We smiled when we were hurting. We said we were okay when we were lonely. We achieved things that looked impressive from the outside, while feeling strangely empty on the inside. And nobody taught us how to simply exist without trying to earn our place. Nobody told us that our worth was never negotiable. Nobody told us that breathing was already enough. Instead, we were taught that love must be deserved, that rest must be earned, and that who we are is never quite sufficient yet. And this belief quietly follows us into adulthood, where it disguises itself as ambition, responsibility, and maturity, even though underneath it is still the same little child asking, "Am I good enough now?" When I look back at my own life, I can see how many years I spent trying to be the reliable one, the wise one, the calm one, always holding myself together so that others could lean on me. And from the outside it looked like strength, but inside, it often felt like carrying a heavy backpack that I never allowed myself to put down, because I thought if I stopped being strong for everyone else, I might disappear. Maybe you know this feeling too. Maybe you became the caretaker, the achiever, the peacemaker, the one who never complains, and everyone praises you for how well you handle life, while secretly you wonder why you feel so tired all the time, why even happy moments seem muted, why there is a quiet sadness you cannot explain. That tiredness is not weakness. That tiredness is the cost of pretending. Because performing requires constant mental calculation, constant self-monitoring, constant adjustment, and the nervous system never truly relaxes when it believes it must maintain an image. And modern science now shows what ancient wisdom always knew, which is that a body that cannot relax cannot heal, and a heart that cannot be authentic cannot feel whole. When you live as a role, your energy leaks. When you live as yourself, your energy returns. And yet nobody taught us this in childhood. Nobody pulled us aside and whispered that our natural state was already complete, that we did not need to impress life in order to belong to it, that we were not actors auditioning for love but expressions of life itself. So we traded our spontaneity for safety. We traded our truth for approval. We traded our aliveness for acceptance. And after many years of these small trades, we woke up one day as adults and wondered why we felt disconnected from ourselves, why joy seemed distant, why silence felt uncomfortable, because deep down, we had forgotten how to simply be without performing. But here is the gentle truth that took me many dark nights to understand, which is that nothing is actually broken in you. Nothing essential has been lost, because beneath all those learned behaviors and protective masks, there is still the same open awareness that you were born with, still untouched, still patient, still waiting like the sky behind the clouds. The child who once laughed for no reason is still there. The one who felt wonder just watching sunlight on the floor is still there. The one who did not need to prove anything is still there. You did not destroy that self. You only covered it, and coverings can be removed. Not by force, not by another performance called self-improvement, but by something much softer and much braver, which is the willingness to stop acting and allow yourself to be seen as you truly are, imperfect, human, tender, and real, like a river that finally stops fighting the current and discovers that the current was carrying it home all along. 2. Performing quietly drains your energy until you forget what vitality feels like. There is a kind of exhaustion that does not come from working too many hours or sleeping too little, a kind of heaviness that settles into your bones, even on days when you have done almost nothing. And if you listen closely, you may realize that this tiredness is not physical at its root, but emotional and energetic, like a battery that has been left on all night, powering something invisible, something you did not even know was running in the background of your life. Because once you learn to perform, once you learn to live through a mask, your system never truly rests. From the moment you wake up, something inside you is already calculating. How should I sound today? How should I look? What will they think of me? Did I say the right thing? Was that too much? Was that not enough? And these questions may seem small and harmless, but when they repeat thousands of times a day, day after day, year after year, they become like tiny drops of water slowly carving through stone, quietly draining your life force without you noticing where it is going. It is like running a marathon inside your own mind while your body is simply trying to make breakfast. You smile at someone even when you feel sad because you do not want to be a burden. You say yes to an invitation even when you crave rest, because you do not want to disappoint anyone. You hold back your truth in conversations because you are afraid of conflict or rejection. And each of these moments costs energy, not a dramatic amount at once, but a steady leak, like air slipping out of a tire that looks fine from the outside, yet feels heavier with every mile. For many years, I did not understand why I felt so tired all the time, even when life looked stable and even successful, because I had food on the table and a roof over my head, and people who respected me, yet inside there was a quiet fatigue that sleep could not fix. And it took me a long time to see that what exhausted me was not what I was doing, but who I was pretending to be while doing it. Because performing means you are never simply present. You are always observing yourself from the outside. You are split in two. One part of you living, another part monitoring how you are living. And that inner division consumes tremendous energy. The way a computer overheats when too many programs are running at the same time, because instead of flowing naturally like a river, you are constantly editing yourself like a movie that never gets released. The nervous system was not designed for this. The body was built for cycles of tension and release, like inhaling and exhaling, like day and night. But performing keeps you stuck in low-grade tension all the time, as if you are waiting for an exam that never begins or a danger that never fully arrives. And so the muscles tighten, the jaw clenches, the shoulders rise, the breath becomes shallow, and you live in a subtle state of defense without realizing it. Over time, anxiety becomes normal, restlessness becomes normal, even numbness becomes normal. You might sit on the couch and call it relaxation, but inside your chest there is still a quiet vibration, still a background hum of worry, still a voice asking whether you are doing enough, being enough, achieving enough. And this constant inner pressure slowly steals the joy from simple things, like drinking coffee in the morning or watching sunlight move across the floor. It is very similar to holding a fake smile all day long. At first, it feels manageable. Your cheeks ache a little, but you tell yourself it is fine. Then after hours, you feel the strain in your face and neck. And by the end of the day, you just want to drop everything and let your muscles collapse. Now imagine doing that not only with your face, but with your entire personality. Imagine smiling with your thoughts, smiling with your opinions, smiling with your emotions, always adjusting, always pleasing, always performing. Of course you are tired. Anyone would be tired. And yet we blame ourselves. We say maybe we are not strong enough, not disciplined enough, not positive enough, when in truth we are simply overworked at the level of the soul. Even science now whispers what the heart has always known, which is that chronic stress changes the chemistry and the electricity of the body. Because when you live in constant self-protection, your brain stays in survival mode, producing stress hormones that keep you alert but prevent deep healing. And your heart rhythm loses coherence, your immune system weakens, and even the tiny oscillations of your cells begin to lose their natural harmony. If you look at the body from an energetic perspective, everything is vibration. Every cell has a frequency. Every organ has a rhythm. And when you are relaxed, open, and authentic, these rhythms synchronize like musicians playing the same song. But when you are afraid and performing, the music becomes noise. The frequencies become chaotic. It is like an orchestra tuning their instruments but never actually playing together. No wonder you feel disconnected. No wonder you feel scattered, because your system is literally out of tune. And I say this not to frighten you but to comfort you, because once you understand that this exhaustion has a cause, you can stop blaming yourself for it. You can stop thinking something is wrong with your character or your willpower, and you can start seeing your fatigue as a wise signal from the body saying, please stop pretending, please come home. There is a profound difference between effort that comes from inspiration and effort that comes from fear. When effort comes from inspiration, you feel alive, even when you are working hard, like a gardener tending the soil with love. But when effort comes from fear, every small task feels heavy, like dragging stones uphill for reasons you cannot remember. Performing is fear-based effort. Being yourself is effortless presence. And presence restores energy the way sleep restores the body. I discovered this slowly, not through philosophy but through breakdown, because there came a time when I simply could not keep up the performance anymore, when the mask felt too heavy and the constant smiling felt dishonest, and when I finally allowed myself to stop pretending to be strong all the time, something unexpected happened, which is that my energy began to return on its own, not because I did anything special but because I stopped wasting it. It felt like closing dozens of open tabs in the mind. It felt like putting down bags I forgot I was carrying. It felt like the first deep breath after years of shallow breathing. Nothing magical, just natural. Like the body saying, thank you. So if you have been feeling tired lately, if you have been wondering why life feels heavier than it should, I want you to consider very gently that maybe you are not broken, or lazy, or failing. Maybe you are simply exhausted from performing a role that was never truly yours, and maybe what you need is not more effort but more honesty. Not more control but more permission. Not another way to improve yourself but the courage to relax back into who you already are. Because when you stop leaking energy through pretending, your vitality does not have to be created. It quietly returns, like a spring of water that was always flowing beneath the ground, waiting for you to clear away the stones. 3. The ego, the mask we mistook for who we are. There comes a very quiet moment in life, often after years of striving and searching and trying to repair ourselves, when we begin to suspect that the voice in our head that has been narrating our story all this time might not actually be who we are. And this realization does not arrive like thunder or revelation, but more like a soft crack in a wall, a thin line of light slipping through a place we never thought to question. And through that small opening, we start to see that what we have been calling me may only be a costume stitched together from memory and fear. For most of our lives, we never doubt this voice because it sounds so intimate and so familiar, because it uses our name and speaks in our language and comments on everything we do, and we assume that anything so close must be our true self. Yet if we slow down enough to observe it carefully, we notice something strange, which is that this voice is never at rest and never satisfied and never fully at peace. And anything that restless and hungry cannot possibly be the essence of who we are. The ego, in the simplest and most human sense, is not some evil force or spiritual enemy, but merely a bundle of old memories, unresolved emotions, and learned comparisons that have been collected over a lifetime like boxes stored in an attic. And because we never opened those boxes with awareness, we started living inside them, mistaking their contents for our identity. It is made of sentences we once heard when we were young. Sentences like, "You are not good enough," or "You must be the best," or "You should not disappoint people," or "You have to prove your worth." And these sentences quietly became beliefs. And those beliefs hardened into a personality. And that personality began to call itself me. But if you look closely, you will see that all of it is secondhand. None of it was born with you. It was taught. It was absorbed. It was inherited. The ego is like a collage made from other people's opinions, like a mirror covered with fingerprints that were never yours. And yet we spend decades polishing those fingerprints, trying to perfect an image that was never authentic to begin with. And because the ego is built from memory, it is always looking backward, replaying old scenes, old mistakes, old wounds, as if the past were still happening now. And at the same time, it is terrified of the future, constantly projecting what might go wrong, what might be lost, what might threaten its fragile sense of control. So it lives swinging between yesterday and tomorrow, while almost never touching this present moment. Have you noticed how rarely the mind simply rests here? How often it says, "When this happens, then I will be okay," or "If only I had done that differently," or "Someday I will finally feel complete." This is the ego's favorite trick. It always promises fulfillment somewhere else, somewhere later, somewhere better. Never here, never now. It whispers that you must become someone before you can relax. Become more successful, become more attractive, become more spiritual, become more healed. There is always another version of you that it insists you should chase. Like a mirage in the desert that keeps moving further away no matter how far you walk. And many people spend their entire lives running after that mirage, believing that peace is just one more achievement away. But the ego can never feel enough, because it is built on comparison. And comparison is a game that has no finish line. If you compare yourself to one person, there will always be another who seems ahead. If you reach one goal, there will always be a higher one. If you fix one flaw, the mind will immediately invent another. It is like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. No matter how much you pour in, it never stays full. And so the ego keeps striving and striving, Not because it is evil, but because it is afraid. Because deep down it knows it is not solid. It knows it is constructed, and anything constructed must constantly defend itself. This is why living from the ego feels tense. This is why there is always a subtle pressure to perform. Because the ego survives on maintenance. It must be protected, validated, reinforced. It needs compliments like fuel. It needs agreement like oxygen. And the moment someone criticizes you or rejects you, it feels as if your entire identity is under attack, even though what is actually threatened is only a story. I remember many years ago when someone questioned my work very harshly, and for days I could not sleep, my mind replaying their words again and again, as if my life depended on fixing their opinion. And later I realized that what hurt so deeply was not the comment itself, but the fragile image of myself that I had been trying so hard to maintain. Because when you build your identity out of thoughts, any thought can shake it. But slowly, through silence and honest self-observation, I began to notice something extraordinary, which is that there was another part of me that never seemed disturbed, another presence that simply watched all of this drama without being caught in it, a quiet awareness that noticed the fear, noticed the comparison, noticed the endless striving, yet remained untouched, like the sky watching the weather. Clouds may come and go, storms may rage, but the sky itself is never harmed. And in the same way, thoughts and emotions come and go inside you, but something deeper remains steady. That steady presence is the real you, not the voice, not the story, not the personality, but the one who is aware of all of it. Right now, as you read these words, there is an awareness that knows you are reading. That awareness has no age, no label, no competition. It does not need to become anything. It simply is. And when you begin to rest as that awareness, even for a few moments, something very gentle happens. Because the ego loosens its grip, and the constant pressure to improve yourself softens, and you start to feel a spaciousness inside, as if the walls of a small room have fallen away and you can finally breathe fresh air. This is not mystical. This is very simple. It is like realizing that you are not the movie on the screen, but the screen itself. And the movie can change 1,000 times without affecting what you truly are. The ego is the character. Awareness is the space in which the character appears. The character struggles. The space simply allows. An awakening, in the most practical sense, is nothing more than shifting your identity from the character to the space, from the mask to the face, from the noise to the silence that has always been there. When this shift begins, life becomes softer. Not because problems disappear, but because you are no longer carrying them as your identity, and you move through experiences like water flowing around stones, instead of like a soldier fighting every obstacle. You stop trying so hard to become someone, you begin to relax into being. And in that relaxation, you discover something that was hidden in plain sight all along, which is that you were never meant to construct yourself like a project, because you were already whole before the mind ever learned the word improvement, already worthy before anyone ever gave you approval, already complete before the ego started its endless search. The mask may have been convincing, but it was never you, and the one who is reading this now, quietly aware behind the eyes, has always been free. For the moment you stop, the quiet quantum door opens. There is a turning point in every human life that does not announce itself with noise or drama, a moment so subtle that you could easily mistake it for nothing at all. And yet this gentle pause carries more transformative power than years of effort, because it is the instant you finally stop trying to control the river of life, and instead allow yourself to float. And in that surrender, something ancient and intelligent begins to move through you again, as if the current had always been there waiting patiently for you to loosen your grip. For most of our lives, we are taught that control equals safety, that if we think carefully enough, plan thoroughly enough, and manage every outcome precisely enough, then nothing will hurt us and nothing will go wrong. So we build our days like fortresses made of schedules and strategies and mental calculations, believing that constant vigilance is the price of survival. And although this habit may look responsible on the surface, deep inside it creates a quiet exhaustion that feels like carrying the weight of the entire sky on your shoulders. Control is seductive because it gives the illusion of certainty. Yet life has never been certain, and never will be. And the more tightly we try to hold it, the more tense our bodies become, like hands gripping sand that keeps slipping through our fingers no matter how hard we squeeze. And after many years of this gripping, we forget what it feels like to simply open the palms and trust the ground beneath our feet. I remember a time when my mind was constantly rehearsing the future as if my thoughts could prevent pain, when every conversation was analyzed afterward and every decision was questioned repeatedly. And although I told myself that I was being careful and mature, my body told a different story through tight shoulders, shallow breathing, and a heart that never seemed to fully relax. And it took me a long while to realize that what I called responsibility was often just fear wearing a respectable mask. Because when you live in control, you are never actually here. You are always somewhere else. You are in tomorrow's problem or yesterday's regret, rarely in this simple moment where life is actually happening. And this constant displacement pulls you away from your own center like a tree whose roots never quite touch the soil. Then one day, usually not by choice but by exhaustion, something inside you gives up the struggle, not in despair but in honesty. And you sit down without a plan and without a method and without trying to fix anything. And for the first time, you allow yourself to simply be still. And that stillness feels unfamiliar at first, almost uncomfortable, because the mind has been moving so fast for so many years that slowing down feels like stepping off a speeding train. When you sit quietly and breathe without trying to achieve a special state, without trying to become spiritual or enlightened or improved, the body begins to soften on its own. The breath deepens naturally like the tide returning to the shore, and the constant noise of thought gradually loses its urgency. Not because you fight it, but because you stop feeding it with attention. The mind slows the way muddy water clears when it is no longer stirred. At first, there are still thoughts rushing by, fragments of memory and unfinished conversations and random worries. But if you simply watch without chasing them, they begin to space out, like cars on an empty road late at night. And in that widening space, you feel something you may not have felt in years, which is quiet. Not the quiet of silence outside, but the quiet inside, a gentle inner spaciousness that feels like coming home after a very long journey. From a scientific perspective, something measurable is happening during this slowing down, because the brain that was once firing rapidly in patterns of stress and problem-solving begins to shift into softer rhythms associated with relaxation, creativity, and intuition, and these slower brain states allow different parts of the mind to communicate more harmoniously, as if separate departments in a busy city suddenly start speaking the same language. At the same time, the heart rhythm becomes more coherent. The nervous system moves out of fight or flight, stress hormones decrease, and the body begins repairing itself in ways that cannot occur while you are tense, which means that stillness is not laziness but biological wisdom, not weakness but restoration. And when the body enters this coherence, something even deeper unfolds that is difficult to describe with ordinary language, because you begin to feel less like a separate object pushing against the world and more like a field of energy participating with it, as if the boundary between you and life has softened, and the air around you no longer feels empty but alive, supportive, almost intimate. In quantum physics, there is a beautiful idea that beneath all solid appearances, reality is made of possibilities. Not fixed things, but potentials waiting to be expressed. And the observer plays a role in what becomes actual, which means that your inner state influences what you experience. And when you are contracted with fear and control, your perception narrows, and you see only threats. But when you are open and relaxed, your perception widens, and you begin to notice opportunities, synchronicities, and gentle guidance that were always present, but previously invisible. It is like standing in a dark room with your fists clenched and then slowly opening your hands and discovering that the door was never locked. In deep stillness, you can feel this openness directly, not as a belief but as a sensation, like floating in warm water where nothing needs to be held up. And for a few precious moments, you realize that you do not have to manage the universe, that your heart beats without your command, that your lungs breathe without your supervision, that life has been carrying you all along without asking for your constant interference. This realization is profoundly humbling and profoundly relieving at the same time, because you see that you were never meant to force your way through existence. You were meant to participate with it, like a dancer moving with the music instead of trying to control every note. And in that participation, there is an intelligence far greater than the thinking mind. An intelligence that guides birds across oceans and grows forests from tiny seeds and heals broken skin while you sleep. And when you stop controlling long enough to listen, you can feel that same intelligence moving through you, guiding you quietly, gently, without drama. This is what I mean when I speak about a door opening. Not a mystical doorway to another world, but a return to the deeper dimension of this one. A shift from effort to trust, from tension to allowance, from becoming to being. Because in that moment of stopping, when you are simply sitting and breathing and not trying to be anyone at all, you touch something that has no fear and no urgency, something vast and calm that has always been here beneath your thoughts. And you realize with a soft kind of wonder that perhaps this presence is who you truly are, and that everything else was just noise on the surface. And once you taste that stillness, even briefly, you begin to understand that awakening does not require you to climb higher or achieve more, but only to pause deeply enough to remember what has always been quietly alive inside you, waiting like an open sky behind the clouds, ready to welcome you the moment you finally stop running and allow yourself to rest. 5. Doing nothing becomes the most profound action of all. There is a strange idea that took me many years to accept. An idea that at first sounded almost irresponsible, almost lazy, almost too simple to be true. And yet the longer I live and the deeper I listen to life itself, the more I see its quiet truth, which is that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is absolutely nothing. Not because you are giving up, but because you are finally getting out of the way. We live in a world that worships effort. From the time we are young, we are told that if we want something, we must push harder, work longer, compete faster, and prove ourselves more aggressively. And although discipline and dedication have their place, there is a hidden violence in this constant pushing, a subtle message that says you are not enough as you are and must struggle endlessly to earn your right to exist. And after many decades of absorbing this message, we begin to treat life like a battlefield rather than a garden. The culture around us praises exhaustion as if it were a badge of honor. People brag about how little they sleep, how busy they are, how many things they are juggling, as if rest were weakness, as if stillness were failure. And without realizing it, we internalize this pressure. We start measuring our worth by how much we accomplish, how productive we appear, how relentlessly we chase improvement, and even our spiritual life becomes another project to optimize, another mountain to climb, another way to secretly tell ourselves that who we are right now is not yet acceptable. So we try harder. We meditate harder, we heal harder, we fix ourselves harder, and in doing so we turn even peace into a struggle. But if you look closely at nature, you will notice something very different. The sun does not strain to rise, the ocean does not force its waves, the trees do not compete to grow faster than the sky. Everything unfolds through allowance rather than aggression. A flower does not wake up in the morning and say, "I must try very hard to bloom today." It simply opens when the conditions are right. Effortless, unapologetic, natural. And this quiet intelligence of nature is also your intelligence, because you are not separate from life. You are life expressing itself as a human being. Yet somewhere along the way we forgot this and began acting as if we must manually control every detail of our existence, like a frightened manager who does not trust the workers to do their job. I used to live this way for a long time, always planning, always striving, always believing that if I relaxed for even a moment, everything would fall apart. And although I achieved some of the things I thought I wanted, there was always a tightness inside me, a subtle fear that if I stopped pushing, I would lose momentum, lose value, lose myself. And it was only when my body grew tired and my heart grew weary that I was forced to slow down, not out of wisdom at first, but out of pure exhaustion. And in that slowing down, something surprising happened. Nothing collapsed, nothing broke. In fact, many things began to fall into place more easily than before. Conversations became smoother, decisions became clearer, opportunities appeared without so much struggle. It felt as if life had been waiting for me to stop interfering so much, like a river that flows naturally once you remove the stones blocking its path. This is when I began to understand that doing nothing does not mean being passive or careless, but rather releasing the inner resistance that keeps you fighting with reality, Because resistance is what consumes most of our energy, not the actions themselves. When you act from tension, everything feels heavy. When you act from relaxation, even great effort feels light. The difference is not in what you do. It is in how you are being while you do it. Think about a seed buried in the soil. The seed does not struggle to grow. It does not clench itself and force its way upward. It simply responds to warmth and moisture and light. And when the time is right, it opens from within, almost invisibly, and a small green shoot appears without noise or drama, and this quiet opening contains more power than any forceful attempt could ever produce. Growth is an unfolding, not a battle. And your life is the same. When you stop resisting what is, when you stop arguing with the present moment, when you stop trying to force outcomes according to your fears and expectations, something begins to move through you that feels wiser than your personal will. Something gentle yet strong, like wind filling the sail of a boat that no longer rows desperately against the current. You start to notice that many problems were never problems at all, only knots created by your own tight grip. You start to notice that clarity comes more easily when the mind is soft. You start to notice that solutions arise naturally when you are not obsessively searching for them. It feels almost like magic, but it is simply alignment. Because when you are no longer pushing against life, you begin moving with it. And when you move with life, there is less friction, less wasted energy, less suffering. I am not saying that you should never act or never make an effort, because action is part of being human. But there is a vast difference between inspired action and forced action, between doing that flows from inner stillness and doing that comes from fear, and the former feels like dancing while the latter feels like dragging a heavy cart uphill. Doing nothing, in the deeper sense, means resting in trust. It means allowing space. It means giving life permission to organize itself without your constant interference. It means sitting quietly sometimes and letting the dust settle so you can actually see clearly. And from that clarity, the right action often reveals itself effortlessly, like the next step appearing naturally when the fog lifts. There is a quiet miracle that happens when you stop forcing. Your body relaxes, your breath deepens, your heart softens, your thoughts slow down. And in that softened state, you become more sensitive to intuition, more connected to subtle guidance, more aware of the small whispers that were always drowned out by noise, and you realize that you do not have to push the door open because it was never locked. You only had to stop leaning against it. So many of the most beautiful moments in life come this way, unforced and unexpected, like laughter shared with a friend, or the warmth of sunlight on your face, or a sudden understanding that arrives while you are washing dishes. And these moments cannot be manufactured through effort. They arrive when you are relaxed enough to receive them. This is the secret the world rarely teaches, that allowing is stronger than forcing, that surrender is sometimes wiser than control, that doing nothing can be the most profound action of all. Because in that nothingness, you finally return to your natural state, a state where life flows through you like a quiet river, where you are no longer fighting every wave, where miracles do not feel supernatural but simply inevitable, and you discover with a gentle smile that the less you try to push the universe, the more the universe seems to carry you exactly where you were meant to go. 6. When you stop proving, you begin to be free. There is a quiet turning point that does not look like a miracle from the outside and does not announce itself with light or thunder, yet it changes the entire landscape of your inner world more deeply than any dramatic breakthrough ever could. And it happens in the gentle moment when you finally grow tired of defending your existence and slowly realize that life was never asking you to justify yourself in the first place. For many years, perhaps for most of our lives, we carry an invisible habit of explanation, as if every breath must come with a reason, and every choice must come with a defense, and we walk through the world like someone constantly presenting evidence in a silent courtroom, hoping that the jury of strangers, family members, colleagues, and even our own restless thoughts will finally declare that we are acceptable, worthy, and safe to belong. Without noticing it, we begin to measure our value through approval, through nods, through praise, through the subtle signals that say, "You did well and you are enough." And when those signals disappear or turn into criticism, we feel as if the ground beneath our feet has been taken away, because the self we built was standing on other people's opinions rather than on the quiet truth of our own being. So we learned to prove. We prove that we are competent. We prove that we are kind. We prove that we are right. We prove that we deserve love. And this constant proving slowly becomes a way of life. A tight armor we wear every day without realizing how heavy it has become, until one day the soul begins to feel exhausted in a way that sleep cannot cure and success cannot soothe. I remember living this way for a long time, smiling when I wanted to rest, explaining when silence would have been enough, arguing for my perspective, even when my heart longed for peace. And on the surface, it looked like strength, yet inside it felt like endless tension, like holding my breath for years without ever truly exhaling. There is a subtle violence in always trying to be right, because it divides the world into sides and turns every conversation into a small battle. And even if you win the argument, you somehow lose your softness, you lose your openness, you lose the simple human connection that does not need victory to exist. And the strange thing is that the ego calls this effort maturity and responsibility, yet the body quietly pays the price through tight shoulders, shallow breathing, restless sleep, and a nervous system that never fully relaxes, as if it were always preparing for the next attack that might never come. Then life, in its quiet wisdom, sometimes brings you to a point of surrender, not through philosophy, but through fatigue, not through inspiration, but through the simple realization that you cannot keep carrying this weight anymore. And in that tiredness, something honest appears, something that whispers very softly that maybe you do not need to prove anything at all. At first, this idea feels dangerous, almost irresponsible, because we were taught that without constant effort, we will disappear or fail or be forgotten. Yet when you gently experiment with letting go, when you allow someone to misunderstand you without rushing to correct them, when you allow a disagreement to pass without defending your position, when you choose peace over being right, you begin to taste a freedom so subtle and so relieving that it feels like stepping out of a noisy room into fresh evening air. You start to notice that nothing terrible happens when you stop performing. The sky does not fall. Your heart does not stop. Life continues. And in fact, it flows more smoothly, because you are no longer fighting every current. There is a very quiet dignity that arises when you no longer seek recognition, because your actions begin to come from sincerity rather than from the hunger to be seen. And this sincerity has a warmth that people can feel even if they cannot explain it, like sitting near a fire on a cold night without needing to talk. When you no longer need to be right, listening becomes easier, because you are not secretly preparing your defense while the other person speaks, and you discover that most conflicts dissolve naturally when there is no one trying to win, as if arguments were fires that can only burn when both sides keep adding wood. When you no longer need to win debates, your words become softer and more precise, not because you are weak, but because you are no longer protecting an identity, and there is a deep strength in that softness, the kind of strength that does not shout but remains steady like the earth beneath your feet. Gradually, a strange lightness begins to spread through your inner world, not the excitement of achieving something grand, but the simple relief of putting down a heavy bag you have been carrying for decades, and you may find yourself breathing more deeply, walking more slowly, smiling for no particular reason, as if your whole system is finally allowed to rest. From a scientific perspective, when the mind stops defending and competing, the nervous system shifts from survival into safety. The heart rhythm becomes more coherent, the brain waves slow into calmer patterns, and the body conserves energy instead of burning it through stress. And what mystics once called peace begins to reveal itself as a very natural biological harmony that was always available beneath the noise. In this harmony, you realize that freedom is not something you achieve after fixing yourself, but something that appears the moment you stop trying to manufacture a better version of who you already are, because the deeper self was never broken and never needed improvement, only space to breathe. And perhaps this gentle inner freedom, this absence of pressure, this quiet sense that nothing needs to be proven anymore, is one of the first real signs of awakening. Not visions that impress the mind, not special experiences that separate you from others, not dramatic transformations that make you feel extraordinary, but a simple and steady ease in your own skin that allows you to live as you are without apology. You begin to walk through the world without asking for permission to exist. You begin to speak without rehearsing how you will be judged. You begin to love without bargaining for validation. And in that naturalness there is a deep rest, like coming home after a very long journey and finally realizing that the door was never locked and the house had been waiting for you all along. This is the freedom that cannot be given by praise and cannot be taken away by criticism, because it does not depend on the outside world at all. And once you taste it even briefly, you understand that awakening is not about becoming someone impressive, but about relaxing back into the quiet truth that you were always enough, even before you tried so hard to prove it. 7. Returning to the body, returning to the present. There comes a gentle moment, after all the striving and all the mental noise have worn you thin, when you begin to sense that the way back to yourself is not hidden in complicated teachings or distant philosophies, but is quietly waiting in something so ordinary and so close that you have overlooked it your entire life. And that doorway is simply the body, this humble and faithful companion that has carried you through every joy and every sorrow without ever asking for applause. For many years we try to live almost entirely in the head, as if life were meant to be solved like a puzzle rather than experienced like a sunrise. And we mistake thinking for living, planning for being, remembering for presence, until one day we realize that while the mind was busy traveling through time, the body was always here, breathing patiently, standing quietly on the earth, like an old friend waiting on the porch for us to finally come home. When you begin to return to the body, the first thing you may notice is how simple it feels. Almost too simple for a world that worships complexity, because it does not require belief or talent or effort. It only asks for attention, the kind of soft attention you would give to a sleeping child, or to the sound of rain against the window in the early morning. You slowly feel your feet touching the ground, and this small sensation that once seemed meaningless now becomes an anchor, a gentle reminder that you are not floating in worries about tomorrow or regrets about yesterday, but standing here, supported by the same earth that has supported countless generations before you. And there is something deeply reassuring about that quiet contact, as if gravity itself were whispering that you belong. Then you begin to notice your breath, not trying to control it or improve it, but simply listening to it the way you would listen to waves moving in and out along the shore. And you realize that the breath has been with you since the first moment of life and has never abandoned you even once, rising and falling faithfully through every heartbreak and every celebration, like a rhythm older than thought. As you stay with this gentle breathing, the mind that was once racing like a frightened animal begins to slow down on its own, not because you forced it into silence, but because you finally stopped chasing it. And in that slowing there is a softness, like muddy water settling until it becomes clear enough to see the bottom. You might begin to sense your heartbeat as well, that quiet pulse beneath the chest that has been working tirelessly day and night without recognition. And when you place your awareness there, it feels almost sacred, not in a mystical way, but in a deeply human way, because you suddenly understand that life is happening right here, in this simple rhythm, not in the stories you tell about yourself. The body never lives in the past, and never worries about the future, because it only knows this moment, this step, this breath, this heartbeat. And in that sense, the body is always enlightened while the mind is often lost, wandering through memories and imaginations like a traveler who forgot the way home. Most of our suffering comes from this wandering, from replaying old conversations, from rehearsing disasters that may never happen, from comparing ourselves to images that do not even exist. And while all of that mental noise consumes enormous energy, the body remains quietly present, like a tree that simply stands in the sun without asking whether it is good enough to grow. When you return your awareness to the body again and again, something subtle begins to change in your nervous system, because the signals of safety grow stronger than the signals of threat. The muscles soften, the shoulders drop, the jaw relaxes, and the breath deepens naturally. And what you once called anxiety slowly dissolves into a steady calm that feels surprisingly ordinary and yet profoundly healing. Science would say that your system is shifting from survival into regulation, that your brain waves are slowing into more coherent patterns, that your heart rhythm is becoming synchronized with your breath, yet you do not need technical language to feel the truth of it, because your whole being simply feels more at ease, as if you had been clenching a fist for years and only now allowed it to open. There is also an emotional honesty that emerges when you inhabit the body, because sensations do not lie the way thoughts sometimes do. And you begin to notice where sadness sits, like a weight in the chest, or where fear tightens the stomach, or where joy expands like warmth across the ribs. And instead of analyzing these feelings, you learn to sit with them gently, allowing them to move through like weather passing across the sky. In this way, the body becomes not an obstacle to spirituality, but the very doorway into it. Because presence is not somewhere above you or beyond you, but right here in the direct experience of being alive, in the simple miracle of sensation, in the quiet aliveness of flesh and bone and breath. And the more you practice this returning, the more you discover that presence is not something you create, but something you uncover. Like brushing dust off an old mirror to reveal the reflection that was always there, and you begin to understand that home was never a place you had to reach, but a state of awareness you had forgotten. There are moments when you walk slowly and feel each step touching the ground, and the world suddenly looks clearer. Colors seem warmer, sounds seem richer, and even the ordinary street outside your house feels strangely beautiful. Not because anything changed outside, but because you are finally here to witness it fully. In those moments, you are not trying to become someone better or more spiritual. You are simply alive, and that aliveness is enough. And there is a deep humility in that realization, because it removes all the grand stories about enlightenment and replaces them with something much simpler and much kinder. You begin to trust that every time you feel lost or overwhelmed, you can return to this quiet anchor of the body, to the feet on the earth, to the breath in the chest, to the steady pulse of the heart, and each return feels like stepping back through the front door of your own house after wandering too far into the cold. Gradually, you see that presence itself is the gate, not a dramatic gate made of light, but a simple wooden door that has always been open. And the moment you step through it, the search relaxes, the struggle softens, and life becomes less about achieving and more about inhabiting. And from this gentle inhabiting, awakening unfolds naturally, not as something extraordinary, but as something deeply intimate, like finally recognizing your own reflection after years of mistaking yourself for someone else. And you realize with quiet gratitude that returning to the body is not a small practice at all, but the most direct and compassionate way back to the truth of who you have always been. 8. Awakening is not becoming someone new. There is a very tender misunderstanding that follows many sincere seekers for years, and it is the quiet belief that awakening must mean transforming into a more impressive version of ourselves, as if enlightenment were some kind of spiritual promotion where we suddenly become wiser than everyone else, calmer than everyone else, almost untouchable by the ordinary messiness of human life. And because of that belief, we secretly keep chasing an image that never truly exists. We imagine that one day we will wake up different, upgraded, polished like a brand new machine, free from fear, free from sadness, free from confusion. And this imagination sounds inspiring at first, yet it quietly creates another form of pressure. Another performance, another mask that says we must improve ourselves before we are allowed to rest. So even on the spiritual path, we continue striving. We try to meditate better. We try to think more positively. We try to speak more wisely. We try to look peaceful in front of others. And without noticing, spirituality becomes just another role to play, another costume added to the collection. Softer perhaps, and more poetic, yet still heavy, because it is built on the same old idea that who we are right now is not enough. I walked through that phase myself for many years, reading every book, attending every talk, collecting teachings the way some people collect souvenirs, hoping that if I gathered enough knowledge I would finally arrive at a superior version of myself. Yet deep inside there was still tension, still comparison, still that quiet whisper saying, "You are not there yet." That whisper is the voice of the ego wearing spiritual clothing, because the ego does not disappear simply because we use gentle words or light candles or talk about consciousness, and it can turn even the most beautiful teachings into another ladder to climb, another reason to judge ourselves, another way to feel either superior or inadequate. But real awakening does not feel like climbing at all. It feels like putting everything down. It feels like taking off a heavy coat after a long winter. It feels like sitting on the porch at the end of the day and realizing there is nowhere else you need to be. Awakening is not becoming a higher version of you. because that idea still assumes there is something fundamentally wrong with the current you. And this assumption keeps the struggle alive, keeps the mind searching, keeps the heart slightly tense, as if love must be earned. In truth, awakening is much quieter and much more ordinary than that. And perhaps that is why many people overlook it, because it does not look like fireworks or dramatic revelations, but more like a gentle return, like walking back into your childhood home and recognizing the familiar smell of wood and sunlight. It is not about adding something new. It is about removing what was never truly you. Layer by layer, you begin to see the false identities you collected along the way. The roles of the good child, the responsible adult, the successful professional, the strong one who never cries, the spiritual one who always understands. And you realize that each of these was simply a strategy to survive and to be loved, not the essence of who you are. As these layers loosen, there is no grand transformation, only a soft relief, like loosening tight shoes after a long walk, and you begin to breathe more naturally because you are no longer trying to fit into shapes that were too small for your soul. It reminds me of cleaning an old mirror that has been stored in the attic for years, covered with dust and fingerprints and time. And at first you might think the mirror is dull or broken. Yet as you gently wipe away the dust, you discover that the surface was always clear, always capable of reflecting light. And nothing new had to be added. Only the unnecessary layers had to be removed. In the same way, your true nature has never been damaged. It has never been lost. It has never needed improvement. It has only been hidden beneath conditioning, fear, and endless self-judgment. When those coverings fall away, even slightly, something very simple shines through. Not a dramatic glow, but a quiet aliveness. A sense of being at home in your own skin. A natural kindness toward yourself and others that does not come from effort, but from understanding. You stop trying to look spiritual. You stop trying to sound wise. You stop trying to impress anyone with your calmness. And strangely, that is when real calmness appears, because it is no longer forced. There is a beautiful humility in this stage, because you no longer feel special or chosen or elevated above anyone else, and instead, you feel deeply human, connected to everyone's struggles and everyone's tenderness, as if the walls between you and the world have gently dissolved. You still feel sadness sometimes. You still feel uncertainty sometimes. You still make mistakes. But none of these experiences define you anymore, and they pass through like clouds across a wide sky, because you no longer mistake the weather for the sky itself. From a scientific point of view, you could say that the brain stops reinforcing rigid self-images, that old neural patterns of defense slowly weaken, that the body relaxes because it no longer has to maintain a false identity, yet from the inside it simply feels like ease, like finally telling the truth after years of pretending. And this ease has a quiet radiance, because when you are not busy becoming someone else, your natural presence becomes more available. Your laughter becomes more genuine. Your compassion becomes more spontaneous, and people may feel safe around you without knowing why. Not because you are extraordinary, but because you are real. And perhaps that is the greatest miracle of all. That awakening does not turn you into a superhuman being floating above life, but returns you to something even more precious, something simple and grounded and authentic, like a clear stream flowing without effort through the valley. So if you ever find yourself chasing the idea of a better, shinier, more advanced version of yourself, you might gently pause and remember that nothing is missing, that the light you are seeking has been quietly present all along, waiting patiently behind the dust of old stories. And all you truly need is the courage to stop polishing the mask and start trusting the face that has always been yours. 9. What life looks like when you stop performing. There is a quiet curiosity that often arises after you begin laying down the masks and stepping away from the exhausting habit of proving yourself. And it is the gentle question of what life actually looks like when you are no longer acting on a stage, when you are no longer adjusting every word and every gesture to secure approval, when you are simply living as you are without rehearsing, without pretending, without carrying the invisible script that once dictated every move. At first, the mind expects something dramatic, some grand transformation that announces itself like a new chapter in bold letters. Yet what unfolds is far more ordinary and far more beautiful, because life without performance does not sparkle like a fantasy. It settles like warm sunlight on a wooden floor, soft, steady, and deeply comforting in a way that does not need to impress anyone. You begin to notice that honesty becomes simpler, not brutal or careless, but gentle and clean, like clear water flowing around stones. And when something inside you feels misaligned, you no longer twist yourself into uncomfortable shapes just to please others, because there is a growing respect for your own energy that feels as natural as protecting your own breath. There are moments when you say no, and this small word that once felt heavy with guilt now feels like a quiet act of love toward yourself, because you finally understand that every time you say yes while your heart is saying no, you abandon yourself a little. And after years of self-abandonment, the soul simply grows tired. So you begin to say no with kindness, not to reject others, but to honor your own limits. And strangely, the world does not collapse when you do this, because the relationships that are real remain, and the ones that depended on your constant sacrifice gently fade away, making space for something more honest and more breathable. Rest also begins to change its meaning, because you no longer treat it as a reward you must earn after exhausting yourself. And you start to see that rest is a natural rhythm of life, as essential as inhaling and exhaling. And when you allow yourself to lie down in the afternoon light without guilt, without the voice that says you should be more productive, you discover a depth of healing that no achievement could ever provide. For many years, we were taught that our worth is measured by how much we do, how much we produce, how much we accomplish. Yet the body quietly whispers another truth, that constant doing without being slowly drains the spirit, like a river forced to flow without ever touching the sea. And when you finally allow yourself to pause, the river remembers where it belongs. Work itself begins to feel different as well, because you are no longer driven primarily by fear, no longer pushed by the anxiety of falling behind or being judged, and instead, you start to move from inspiration, from a subtle inner yes that feels warm and alive. And this kind of action has a completely different quality, lighter, more creative, almost playful, as if life were dancing through you rather than being dragged uphill. You may still work hard, you may still dedicate yourself fully, yet there is less strain in it, less desperation, because your identity is no longer tied to the outcome. And whether something succeeds or fails, it does not shake the foundation of who you are, since that foundation is now rooted in presence rather than performance. Comparison also begins to lose its grip, because when you are no longer trying to prove your value, there is no reason to measure yourself against anyone else. And you start to see how unnecessary that old habit was, like comparing the moon to the ocean when each has its own quiet beauty and its own rhythm. You look at others, and instead of feeling envy or superiority, you feel something softer, something like appreciation, because you recognize that everyone is walking their own path with their own invisible struggles, and there is no ladder to climb, no ranking system in the heart of existence, only different expressions of the same life moving in countless forms. This absence of comparison creates an unexpected spaciousness inside, a kind of inner silence where joy can arise from the simplest things, from the taste of morning coffee, from the sound of birds outside the window, from a slow walk under a fading sky. And these small moments begin to feel more nourishing than the grand achievements that once seemed so important. Joy becomes quieter, simpler, more human. It no longer depends on extraordinary circumstances, because it flows naturally from being fully here, fully alive, like a child who can spend hours watching clouds without needing anything else. There is also a new gentleness in the way you speak to yourself, because the harsh inner critic that once pushed you relentlessly starts to soften, and when you make a mistake, you no longer attack yourself with old words of shame, but instead respond with the same compassion you would offer a dear friend. And this kindness slowly rebuilds trust between you and your own heart. From a physiological perspective, your system begins to conserve energy that was once wasted on tension and self-defense. Your breath becomes deeper, your sleep more restful, your movements more relaxed, and what spiritual traditions call harmony reveals itself as a very practical state of balance in the body and brain, a coherence that allows life to flow with less friction. And perhaps the most beautiful change of all is that you no longer feel like you are watching your life from the outside, no longer acting in a story that must impress an invisible audience, but instead you feel intimately inside each moment, touching it, tasting it, inhabiting it fully, as if you finally stepped off the stage and into the real world where nothing needs applause to be meaningful. This is what life begins to look like when performance ends. Not glamorous, not dramatic, not perfect, but deeply sincere and quietly luminous, like a small lamp glowing in the evening, steady and warm, enough to light the room without trying to outshine the stars. And in that gentle glow, you realize that authenticity itself is the greatest freedom you could ever know. 10. When you stop resisting, life begins to support you. There is a subtle shift that happens after you have put down the masks, after you have stopped chasing approval, after you have returned to the body and allowed yourself to simply be who you are without performance. And this shift is so quiet that you might miss it at first. Yet it changes the way reality itself seems to respond to you, as if the world that once felt heavy and uncooperative suddenly begins to move with you rather than against you. For most of our lives, we feel as though we are pushing a large stone uphill, straining with effort, calculating every step, forcing outcomes, worrying constantly about whether things will work out, and this constant resistance creates a kind of inner friction that makes even simple tasks feel exhausting. As if life were a stubborn door we must break open with our bare hands. But when you begin to soften inside, when you stop fighting every moment and stop trying to control every detail, something curious begins to happen, because the door you were pushing so hard against quietly swings open on its own, and you stand there almost embarrassed, realizing that it was never locked in the first place. You may start noticing small synchronicities, those gentle and almost playful alignments that feel too precise to be random, like thinking of someone you have not spoken to in years and receiving a call from them later that day, or searching quietly for guidance and stumbling upon exactly the right book, the right sentence, the right conversation that answers the question you never even spoke out loud. These moments do not feel magical in a dramatic way, but intimate, like life is whispering back to you, like an old friend who has been listening all along and now begins to respond because you finally slowed down enough to hear. Opportunities also begin to arrive with less strain, not because you suddenly become luckier than everyone else, but because you are no longer blocking the natural flow with fear and doubt. And when the mind is not constantly tightening around worst-case scenarios, you start seeing paths that were always there but hidden by your own tension. It is like walking through a forest while clenching your fists and staring only at the ground, missing the sunlight between the trees, and then one day relaxing your hands and lifting your gaze, only to discover that the trail has been clear the entire time. The right people seem to appear at the right moments. Conversations unfold effortlessly. Collaborations feel natural rather than forced. And instead of chasing connections, you simply show up as yourself and allow resonance to do its quiet work, like musical notes that naturally harmonize without trying to dominate each other. You might meet someone in a cafe who shares exactly the insight you needed, or receive an unexpected invitation that opens a new chapter of your life, or find that problems which once required endless struggle now resolve themselves through simple and almost elegant solutions. And all of this begins to create a gentle trust that you are not alone in this journey. From the outside, it may look like coincidence, yet from the inside, it feels like cooperation, as if the universe itself were leaning slightly toward you, not because you are special or chosen, but because you are finally aligned rather than resisting. For many years, we were taught that life is a battlefield where only constant effort and vigilance keep us safe, and this belief keeps the nervous system in a state of defense, always bracing, always expecting impact. And in that state, we unknowingly send out signals of fear that shape our perception and behavior, creating exactly the struggle we are trying to avoid. But when you relax into trust, when you stop assuming that everything is against you, your entire system changes frequency. And science would say that your brain filters information differently, that your heart and mind move into coherence, that you become more intuitive and creative. Yet from a lived experience, it simply feels like breathing fresh air after years in a crowded room. You begin to act not from panic but from clarity, not from scarcity but from sufficiency. And this inner state naturally leads to wiser decisions, kinder words, better timing. And what once looked like luck is often just the natural consequence of being present and open. It is similar to floating in water, because when you thrash and fight the water, you sink and exhaust yourself. But when you relax and trust the buoyancy, the water holds you effortlessly, and life is very much like that, always capable of supporting you if you stop struggling against it. This does not mean that challenges disappear or that everything becomes perfect, because life will still bring changes and losses and unexpected turns. Yet even these experiences feel different, less like punishments and more like movements in a larger dance, and you begin to sense that each event is guiding you rather than blocking you. There is a quiet confidence that grows, not the loud confidence of ego, but the soft confidence of someone who knows they are carried, like a child falling asleep in the backseat of a car, trusting that they will arrive home without needing to control the road. And perhaps the most beautiful realization is that life was always supporting you, even in the years when you felt alone and abandoned, because many of the detours and delays that once seemed like failures were actually protections or redirections, gently steering you towards something more aligned with your true nature. You start looking back and seeing how certain doors closed at exactly the right time, how certain relationships ended to make space for healthier ones, how certain disappointments quietly saved you from paths that would have drained your soul, and what once felt like chaos now reveals an unexpected intelligence woven through everything. So when people say that the universe begins to cooperate with you, it is not that reality suddenly changes its rules, but that you stop resisting the current that was already carrying you. And once resistance fades, flow becomes visible, like a river that was always moving beneath the ice. And living in this flow does not require grand faith or complicated rituals. It only asks for softness, for presence, for the courage to release control and trust that you are part of something larger than your anxious thoughts, something steady and generous that has been supporting your every breath since the day you were born. In this way, life becomes less of a fight and more of a partnership, less of a problem to solve and more of a conversation to listen to. And you walk forward with a quiet gratitude, feeling that invisible hands are gently guiding you, not pushing you, simply accompanying you, as you continue this simple and sacred journey of being fully, honestly, alive. A gentle closing, like a hand resting on your shoulder. After walking together through all these quiet realizations, after slowly peeling away the layers of effort and fear and old performances that we once believed were necessary for survival, there is something very simple I want to leave with you. Something so simple that the mind may overlook it, yet the heart will recognize it immediately. Like hearing an old melody from childhood that you did not know you still remembered. If you take nothing else from this conversation, I hope you carry this one understanding with you, not as a theory but as a feeling in your chest, that you were never broken, never behind, never wrong at your core, and that most of your exhaustion did not come from life itself, but from the endless effort of trying to act like someone you thought you needed to be. For so many years, you have been performing strength when you felt fragile, performing certainty when you felt confused, performing happiness when you felt tired, and this constant acting slowly drained your energy like a small leak in a water tank, so subtle at first that you barely noticed, until one day, you wondered why you felt empty, even though you had done everything right. And maybe no one ever told you that it was safe to stop. Maybe no one ever told you that you did not have to earn your place here. Maybe no one ever told you that simply existing was already enough. So you kept trying harder, smiling wider, pushing further, thinking that if you just improved yourself a little more, you would finally deserve to rest. Yet rest never came because the finish line kept moving further away, like chasing the horizon across an endless desert. But what if there was never a race to begin with? What if there was never a judge watching your performance? What if the only thing that ever asked for your attention was this quiet moment right here? When I look back on my own darker years, the years when I felt lost and disconnected, and constantly measuring myself against impossible standards, I realize now that nothing was truly wrong with me, and that I was simply tired. Tired from pretending, tired from carrying identities that did not fit, tired from believing that love had conditions. And the healing did not arrive as some grand revelation. It arrived softly. It arrived like permission. Permission to sit down. Permission to breathe. Permission to be ordinary. It might sound almost too small to matter, yet these small permissions changed everything. Because when you stop trying to fix yourself, you finally have the space to feel yourself, and in that space something very honest begins to bloom, something that was always there beneath the noise. So tonight, or whenever you finish listening to these words, I want to invite you into a very simple experiment, something so gentle that your mind cannot turn it into another task to accomplish, something that requires no skill and no belief and no special posture. Just sit somewhere quiet, turn off the noise for a little while, let your hands rest loosely, and allow yourself to sit for 5 minutes without trying to improve anything at all. Do not correct your thoughts. Do not adjust your emotions. Do not attempt to become calmer or wiser or more spiritual. Simply breathe. Feel the air entering your body and leaving your body, like the tide moving in and out along the shore, and let that be enough. If the mind wanders, let it wander. If the heart feels heavy, let it feel heavy. If nothing special happens, let nothing special happen. Because this is not about achieving a state. This is about remembering that you are already here. As you sit there, you might imagine gently placing your old masks on the ground beside you. The mask of the strong one, the mask of the successful one, the mask of the one who always has the answers, and you do not throw them away with anger. You simply set them down with gratitude, like tools that helped you survive but are no longer needed. Then picture yourself stepping off the stage you have been standing on for so long, stepping down into the soft grass behind the theater, feeling the cool earth beneath your bare feet, feeling the evening air on your skin, realizing that there was never an audience demanding perfection, only an open sky and a quiet field waiting for you to relax. In that image, there is no applause, no judgment, no comparison, only space, only breath, only the gentle rhythm of being alive. And in that simplicity, you may discover something that has been hiding in plain sight your entire life, that you do not need to become anyone else, do not need to upgrade yourself, do not need to transform into some ideal version of a spiritual person, because the one who is breathing right now, the one who is listening right now, has always been enough. You do not need to become someone. You only need to remember who you have always been. Not the roles, not the stories, not the expectations, but the quiet awareness behind all of it, the steady presence that has watched every chapter of your life without ever being damaged by any of them. And when you remember this, even for a moment, something inside relaxes so deeply that it feels like coming home after a very long journey, like setting down a heavy suitcase and realizing you never have to pick it up again. So we end here not with a conclusion, not with a final lesson, but with a small and gentle pause, like the space between two breaths. Because sometimes the most healing thing is not another word, but a little silence where you can simply sit and feel the truth for yourself, quietly, naturally, exactly as you are.